The living room was staged to perfection, a masterclass in artificial misery. Every element had been meticulously curated by my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, to tell a story that wasn't mine. She had spent the last hour dimming the smart lights to a sickly, yellowish hue and draping a moth-eaten crochet blanket over the arm of the velvet sofa. A sofa I had bought with my own hard-earned commissions 20 years ago, back when I was the top auditor at Miller & Associates. Stay still, Eleanor. And for heaven's sake, stop looking so sharp. Drop your shoulders. Look confused, Vanessa commanded, her voice thin and sharp like a razor blade. She lunged toward me, her manicured fingers digging into my shoulders as she forced me into an old, stained cardigan. It was a hideous thing, filled with age and smelling of cedar and neglect. I hadn't worn it in a decade. It was destined for the donation bin until Vanessa rescued it to use as a costume. To the world outside these four walls, to the thousands of strangers who followed her lifestyle and grace blog, this cardigan was the uniform of my decline. I remained a silent statue, a ghost in my own home. I watched her through the reflection in the darkened television screen. Vanessa was 32, vibrant, and possessed an insatiable hunger for likes that she mistook for love. To her, I was no longer a mother-in-law, a retired professional, or a woman with a history. I was a prop. I was the demented mother-in-law she so selflessly cared for, a burden she carried with a curated smile and a hashtag. Flash. The ring light blinded me for a second. Vanessa peered at the screen of her iPhone, her brow furrowed in concentration. Better, she muttered. But try to look away from the camera. Like you're searching for a memory you can't quite find. That really gets the engagement up. The Caregiver Chronicles series is our highest performing content this month. People love a saint, Eleanor, and I'm playing the part beautifully. I did as I was told. I tilted my head, letting my gaze drift toward the hallway. I played the role of the frail, fading woman with the same precision I used to apply to a complex tax audit. It was a mask, a necessary camouflage. For months, I had realized that in this house, my intelligence was a threat. If I was sharp, I was difficult. If I was independent, I was unappreciative. But if I was fading, I was an asset. My son, Daniel, walked into the room, his eyes glued to his own phone. He didn't look at me, not really. He looked at the version of me Vanessa was creating. He had grown thin lately, the stress of his failing tech startup etching deep lines around his mouth. He needed a miracle, or more accurately, he needed a liquidation of assets. My assets. Did you get the shot? Daniel asked, his voice devoid of warmth. Almost, Vanessa replied, not looking up from her editing app. I'm captioning it now. Some days are harder than others. Tonight, Eleanor forgot where she was for a moment. My heart breaks, but I'm so grateful to be her anchor in the storm. Hashtag Alzheimer's awareness, hashtag family first, hashtag sacrifice. The sheer audacity of it should have made me scream. I am 65. My mind is as clear as a mountain stream. I do the New York Times crossword in pen every morning before they wake up. I manage my own clandestine stock portfolio from a tablet hidden beneath my mattress. But here, under the glow of Vanessa's ring light, I was a tragic headline. We need to hurry this up, Daniel said, finally glancing at me with a flicker of guilt that he quickly extinguished. The lawyer is waiting for the digital signatures on the preliminary assessment. Vanessa nodded, finally satisfied with her filter. Go sit with him in the kitchen, Dan. I'll bring her in when it's time for the slow walk. She turned to me, her smile bright and terrifyingly fake. You're doing so well, Eleanor. Just a few more papers to look at, and then you can go to bed. Wouldn't that be nice? A long, long sleep? She didn't wait for an answer. She pivoted on her heels and marched toward the kitchen, her phone already chiming with the first wave of pity-filled notifications from her post. I sat alone in the dim light for a moment. The silence of the house felt heavy, laden with the betrayal of a son I had raised on stories of integrity and strength. I thought of my late husband, Thomas. He always used to say, good companies aren't destroyed by competition, Eleanor. They're destroyed by the wrong people running them. He was talking about business, but as I looked around my hijacked living room, I realized it applied to families too. I stood up slowly. I didn't need to act frail now. There was no one to watch. My joints were a bit stiff, yes, but my heart was a drum of cold, calculated resolve. I walked toward the mahogany coffee table, the one Vanessa wanted to replace with something more modern, as soon as my name was off the deed. In her haste to chase digital validation, she had grown careless. Her leather designer tote bag sat slumped on the table, and sticking out of the side pocket was a thick manila folder. I moved with the ghost-like silence I had perfected over the last few months. My hand didn't shake as I reached for the folder. I pulled it out just far enough to read the bold, black lettering on the cover page. Petition for permanent guardianship and power of attorney. Final draft. My breath hitched, but only for a second. I flipped the page. There it was, a psychological evaluation from a doctor I had never met, detailing a rapid cognitive decline and incapacity to manage financial affairs. Attached to the back was a brochure for the Willows, a high-end memory care facility 3 hours away from the city. It was a gilded cage. They weren't just looking for my signature on a deed. They were looking to erase my existence entirely. They wanted the house. They wanted the retirement fund Thomas had left me. They wanted the demented mother-in-law to disappear so the grieving, wealthy couple could take center stage. In the kitchen, I heard the clink of a wine glass and Daniel's low, nervous laugh. She won't even know what she's signing, Dan. The doctor's note makes it airtight. We'll be in the clear by the end of the month. I tucked the folder back into the bag exactly as I had found it. I smoothed the hideous cardigan. I dimmed the light in my eyes until they looked vacant and tired. They didn't realize that while Vanessa was focusing her lens on my fake vulnerability, I had spent the last hour documenting every word of their conversation on the voice recorder tucked into the pocket of my skirt, hidden beneath the wool of the cardigan. I wasn't just a prop in their play. I was the auditor who had just found a massive discrepancy in their souls. Eleanor. Vanessa called out from the kitchen, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We're ready for you, dear. I slumped my shoulders, let my jaw slacken just a fraction, and began the slow, shuffling walk toward the light. The hunt had begun, but they were the ones walking into the trap. The door to my life was closing, but I was the one holding the key. The kitchen was a cathedral of cold marble and sharp edges, much like the people standing within it. I hovered in the shadows of the hallway for a moment, letting the heavy wool of the cardigan itch against my skin. A physical reminder of the discomfort I was forced to embody. Daniel was leaning against the kitchen island, swirling a glass of expensive Cabernet. Vanessa stood opposite him, her eyes bright with the feverish glow of a woman who had just seen her follower count jump by 5,000. On the counter between them sat a laptop, its screen glowing with the legal documents that would, if they had their way, turn me into a ghost in my own life. She's coming, Vanessa whispered, her voice tight with a mix of excitement and nerves. Remember, Dan, don't be too aggressive. We need her to feel confused, not threatened. If she gets defensive, she might refuse to sign, and then we have to go through the competency hearing, which will be a nightmare for the brand. I know, Daniel snapped, though his hand trembled slightly as he set the glass down. It's a lot, Vanessa. This is the house I grew up in. It's a house that's drowning us in debt, she hissed back. Your startup is 6 months behind on payroll. My sponsorships won't cover the interest on the bridge loan. We need this, Daniel. She's 65. She doesn't need 4 bedrooms and a view of the park. The Willows is nice. They have gardens. They have professionals who actually know how to handle someone in her condition. I took a deep breath, smoothing my face into the mask of vacant exhaustion I had practiced in the mirror. I stepped into the light. Daniel? Is it time for my medicine? I asked, my voice slightly thin, wavering just enough to suggest a mind losing its grip on the present. Daniel flinched. He looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees. Then, the cold calculation of a failing businessman took over. No, Mom. No medicine tonight. We just have some paperwork to go over. Remember what we talked about? Putting everything in order, so you don't have to worry about the bills anymore. I drifted toward the chair they had pulled out for me. Vanessa moved with the grace of a predator, sliding the laptop toward the center of the table. It's very simple, Eleanor, she said, her voice dripping with that cloying, artificial sweetness that made my skin crawl. Since your little episode at the grocery store last week. You remember, don't you? When you forgot your PIN? I hadn't forgotten my PIN. I had blocked the card because I noticed a series of unauthorized charges from a high-end boutique in Paris. Charges I knew Vanessa had made using the secondary card I'd foolishly given Daniel for emergencies. But I nodded slowly, letting a look of feigned shame cloud my eyes. I think so. Everything is so foggy lately. Exactly, Vanessa purred, leaning in. That's why we're doing this. This document just gives Daniel the authority to handle the boring stuff. The taxes, the maintenance on the house, the investment accounts. It's an act of love, really. So you can just focus on your knitting and your walks. I looked at the screen. My eyes, which could still read the fine print of a corporate merger without glasses, pretended to struggle with the glowing text. I saw the clauses they thought I wouldn't understand. Unrevocable power of attorney, immediate liquidation rights, waiver of notification. Is this about the house? I asked, my voice small. It's about your security, Daniel said, stepping closer and placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a lead weight. The market is shifting. If we don't move the assets into a trust now, the taxes will eat up everything Dad left. You want to be taken care of, don't you? Like we've been taking care of you. I looked at my son. I wanted to ask him if taking care of me included the hidden cameras Vanessa had installed in my bathroom for my safety, or the way they had stopped inviting me to dinner, leaving me to eat toast in my room while they hosted networking mixers downstairs. I wanted to ask him if he remembered that I was the one who did the books for his father's company for 25 years, ensuring he had the trust fund he was currently pissing away. Instead, I let a single tear trail down my cheek. I don't want to be a burden, Daniel. I know I've been difficult. You're not a burden, sweetie, Vanessa lied, sliding a digital stylus into my hand. You're family, and family looks out for each other. Just sign here, and then the little box at the bottom. It's just a digital signature. Easy as pie. I held the stylus. It felt like a weapon. If I signed this, I was officially unfit. If I didn't, they would escalate. They had the doctor's note. A fraudulent piece of paper from a man Vanessa was likely paying off with my own money. They had the social media evidence of my decline. But I had something they hadn't accounted for. In the pocket of my cardigan, the small digital recorder was humming, capturing the predatory tone of Vanessa's voice and Daniel's silent complicity. And more importantly, I had the Hallbrook files. 2 days ago, while they were out at a gallery opening, I had accessed Daniel's home office. I wasn't looking for money. I was looking for the truth. I found it in his deleted files. He hadn't just lost his startup's capital. He had been embezzling from the legacy trust Thomas had set up for the grandkids. He was desperate. And desperate people make mistakes. Wait, I whispered, pulling the stylus back just as it touched the screen. What was that sound? Vanessa jumped, her eyes darting to the window. What sound? There's no sound, Eleanor. It sounded like a camera, I said, letting a flicker of paranoia enter my voice. I stood up abruptly, knocking the stylus onto the floor. Are you filming me again, Vanessa? For the internet. Vanessa's face transformed. The mask of the saintly caregiver slipped, revealing a sneer of pure, unfiltered contempt. Oh, for God's sake, Eleanor. Nobody is filming you right now. Sit down and sign the damn paper, so we can all go to bed. Vanessa, easy, Daniel warned, but he didn't move to help me. No. Vanessa snapped at him. I'm tired of playing nice. I spend all day staging photos of this senile old woman just to keep our heads above water. And she can't even sign a document without having a psychotic break. Sign it, Eleanor. Now. I backed away, trembling, partly from the chill of her words, and partly from the adrenaline of finally seeing the monster in the light. I need to go to my room. I whimpered, clutching my cardigan shut. You're not going anywhere until this is done, Daniel said, his voice hardening. He stepped between me and the hallway. The son I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me as a bank account with a heartbeat. I looked at him, really looked at him, and let the vacancy leave my eyes for just a split second. I wanted him to see the mother who had taught him how to read, the woman who had held his hand through every fever. But his eyes were blank, focused only on the glowing laptop screen. Fine, I whispered. I'll sign it. But I need my glasses. They're in the hutch. Vanessa sighed dramatically. I'll get them. Stay there. Don't move. As she turned her back, I didn't reach for glasses. I reached for the small, decorative vase on the sideboard. The one that held the spare key to Thomas's old study at the Holbrook office. I tucked it into my palm. They thought the door was closing on me. They thought they were locking me in a room where the walls were made of pity and forgotten memories. Here, Vanessa said, shoving a pair of reading glasses into my hand. Now sit. Sign. Or so help me, I'll call the ambulance tonight and have them take you to the psych ward instead of the Willows. Iset. I put on the glasses. I picked up the stylus. My hand didn't shake this time. I signed. Not with my name, but with a series of characters that looked like a signature to a casual observer, but were actually a code, a specific sequence that I had used in my auditing days to flag a document signed under duress. There, I said, sliding the laptop back. Is that what you wanted? Vanessa snatched the computer away, her eyes devouring the screen. Yes. Finally. She didn't thank me. She didn't hug me. She and Daniel huddled over the screen, already discussing which realtor to call in the morning. I walked out of the kitchen, my shuffling gait perfectly intact until I reached the safety of the dark hallway. Once there, I stood tall. The itch of the cardigan was gone. I felt nothing but the cold, hard weight of the key in my hand. They had their signature. They had their power of attorney. But they didn't realize that by declaring me incompetent, they had just handed me the perfect legal shield. A woman who doesn't know what she's doing can't be held responsible for the accidental deletion of a startup's main server, can she? Or for the confused phone call to the IRS regarding a certain son's embezzlement. I went to my room and locked the door. Behind the closed door, the frail Eleanor disappeared. I pulled out my hidden tablet and opened a secure line to Mark, Thomas's old partner at the Holbrook. The hook was set. Now, I just had to wait for them to pull the line. The Women of Compassion Gala was a spectacle of high society hypocrisy, held in the grand ballroom of the Holbrook Hotel. The very same hotel my husband and I had helped launch 30 years ago. Vanessa was in her element. She moved through the crowd like a politician, her silk gown shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. I, however, was her most important accessory for the evening. To ensure I looked the part of the eccentric, fading matriarch, Vanessa had dressed me in a mismatched outfit. A vintage velvet skirt that was 2 sizes too big, held up by a garish plastic belt, and a silk blouse with a coffee stain she had intentionally ignored. She hadn't let me style my hair, leaving it wispy and unkempt. It adds to the authenticity, Eleanor, she had whispered while applying a layer of pale foundation to make me look sickly. Now, I sat at a small table near the back of the stage, positioned just so the cameras could catch my vacant expression during her keynote speech. Patience. Vanessa's voice amplified through the hall, thick with rehearsed emotion. Patience is what we owe our elders. When my dear mother-in-law, Eleanor, began to lose her grip on the world she once knew, I didn't see a burden. I saw an opportunity to give back a fraction of the love she once gave us. A collective awe rippled through the audience. I saw women dabbing their eyes with lace handkerchiefs. Daniel stood in the front row, clapping with a hollow intensity. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery, oblivious to the fact that the ticket was forged. It hasn't been easy, Vanessa continued, her voice trembling perfectly. There are nights when she doesn't recognize her own home. Nights when she wonders. But we stay by her side, guarding her dignity even when she cannot. I watched her from the shadows of the stage wing, guarding my dignity. The irony was a bitter pill. Only an hour ago, in the dressing room, she had hissed at me to shut up and sit still, when I had reached for my own glasses. She had snatched my purse away, rummaging through it to make sure I wasn't carrying anything that could disrupt the narrative. She hadn't found the second recorder. It was sewn into the lining of the velvet skirt. A small lump I had disguised as a bunched-up slip. Today, Vanessa said, building to her climax, I am proud to announce the launch of the Eleanor Legacy Foundation, dedicated to providing memory care for those who... She stopped. A flicker of confusion crossed her face as the giant projector screen behind her, which was supposed to show a montage of her caring for me, began to glitch. The image of us laughing over tea froze, then dissolved into static. I reached into the deep pocket of my skirt and felt the small, tactile buttons of the remote trigger I had synced to the hotel's media server earlier that afternoon. I had spent weeks studying the Hallbrook's security protocols. Perks of being the woman who once audited their entire system. The screen flickered back to life, but the image was different. It wasn't a professional photograph. It was grainy, wide-angled, and unmistakably from a hidden security camera. The ballroom went deathly quiet. On the screen, a video began to play. It was the kitchen from 3 nights ago. Vanessa was visible, her face distorted with rage, screaming at me because I had accidentally moved a ring light. Asterisk, you stupid, senile old bat. Do you have any idea how much that shot was worth? Sign the papers or I'll have you locked in a room where you'll never see the sun again. Asterisk. The audience gasped. The sound of her voice, shrill and abusive, echoed through the high-end speakers. Vanessa turned around, her face draining of all color. She looked like a ghost seeing her own funeral. Turn it off, Daniel shouted from the front row, leaping toward the tech booth. That's a deepfake. It's a hack. But the video didn't stop. It transitioned to a second clip. This one was audio only, backed by a static image of Daniel and Vanessa's bank statements. It was the recording from the kitchen table. Asterisk, she won't even know what she's signing, Dan. The doctor's note makes it airtight. We'll be in the clear by the end of the month. We sell the house, take the trust, and Eleanor goes to the Willows. Out of sight, out of mind. Asterisk. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. It was the sound of 1,000 reputations shattering at once. The Women of Compassion committee members looked at Vanessa, as if she were a venomous snake that had just crawled onto the stage. Vanessa spun back toward the microphone, her breath coming in ragged gasps. This is a misunderstanding. My mother-in-law, she's sick. She's delusional. She's trying to ruin me. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and pleading. She expected me to look confused. She expected me to play the part of the witness who couldn't remember her own name. I stood up. I didn't shuffle. I didn't tilt my head. I stood with the ramrod straight posture of a woman who had commanded boardrooms before Vanessa was in diapers. I reached for the plastic belt at my waist, unclipped it, and let the oversized velvet skirt fall to the floor. Underneath, I was wearing a sharp charcoal gray suit, the kind of suit that said I am the one who asks the questions. I walked toward the podium. Vanessa backed away as if I were a specter. The crowd began to murmur, the sound rising like a tide. I reached the microphone and gently moved Vanessa aside. She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. Good evening, I said, my voice projecting with a cold, clear authority that filled every corner of the ballroom. I believe there has been a significant discrepancy in tonight's presentation. I looked directly at Daniel, who was frozen in the aisle, his face a mask of horror. My daughter-in-law is right about one thing, I continued, leaning into the mic. Patience is a virtue. And I have been very, very patient. I turned back to the audience, many of whom were already holding up their phones, recording the downfall in real time. I am Eleanor Vance. I am a retired senior auditor, a widow, and as of 5 minutes ago, the primary whistleblower in a federal investigation into financial elder abuse and embezzlement. I felt a surge of cold triumph. The hook was set, and the world was watching. Vanessa, dear, I whispered, loud enough for the mic to catch. You wanted a viral moment. I hope this one meets your expectations. I didn't wait for her to respond. I stepped off the stage, my heels clicking firmly against the polished wood, leaving the ruins of their lives behind me. The door to the ballroom was held open by 2 men in dark suits, not hotel staff, but the legal team I had retained weeks ago. As I walked past my son, I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I simply said, the car is waiting, Daniel. But it isn't taking us home. The lobby of the Hallbrook Hotel was a blur of flashing lights and panicked whispers as I made my exit. The prestige of the Women of Compassion gala had evaporated, replaced by the electric hum of a scandal in progress. My legal team, 2 men with faces like flint and briefcases full of ruin, walked in formation with me, their presence a silent barrier between me and the world I was dismantling. Eleanor. Wait. Mom. Daniel's voice cracked across the marble foyer. He was running, his expensive suit jacket flapping awkwardly, his face a mask of sweating desperation. Behind him, Vanessa was struggling to keep up, her high heels clicking frantically. She looked like a broken doll, her makeup smeared from the heat of the stage lights and the sudden, freezing realization that her digital empire was ash. I stopped near the revolving glass doors and turned slowly. I didn't feel the surge of anger I expected. I felt a profound, hollow stillness. The projection. Daniel panted, skidding to a halt a few feet away. Mom, that was private. That was out of context. We can fix this. We can tell them it was a prank, a social experiment for Vanessa's followers. Just come back inside and tell the board you're fine. Tell them you're confused. Even now, with his world collapsing, his first instinct was to lean on the lie. I am fine, Daniel, I said, my voice resonating with a clarity that seemed to make him flinch. In fact, I haven't been this fine since your father passed away. As for being confused, the only thing I find confusing is how I raised a man who thinks his mother's soul is a commodity to be traded for a tech loan. Vanessa pushed past him, her eyes wild. You've ruined everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? My sponsors, my contracts, they're already emailing. I'm being dropped in real time, Eleanor. You're supposed to be the one who needs us. You're 65. You're nothing without this family. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the greed that had blinded her to the fact that the frail old woman she mocked was the same woman who had once navigated the treacherous waters of international corporate auditing. Vanessa, I said softly, stepping closer until she had to tilt her head back to meet my eyes. You spent so much time looking at me through a lens that you forgot to look at me with your eyes. You saw a prop. I saw a predator. And a good auditor always follows the paper trail. I signaled to one of my lawyers, who handed me a slim, black tablet. I tapped the screen and held it up for them to see. This is a mirror of the server at your startup, Daniel, I said. And these red highlighted rows? Those are the transfers from the Hallbrook Legacy Trust. $700,000 moved into an offshore shell company over the last 18 months. Unauthorized. Unaccounted for. Daniel's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. How did you get past the encryption? You used your father's birthday as the override code, Daniel. You always were sentimental when it came to your shortcuts, I replied. I didn't just record your insults in the kitchen. I audited your life. Every penny you took from your children's future to fund your vanity projects is documented. The authorities were notified an hour ago. Mom, please, Daniel whispered, the bravado finally breaking. He reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, letting his hand fall into the empty air. We're family. We can settle this at home. Let's just go back to the house. The house, I repeated. The house that you tried to trick me into signing away? The house Vanessa wanted to turn into a backdrop for her saintly videos? I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key. The original key to the front door, the one Thomas had given me the day we moved in. I looked at it for a moment, then dropped it into Daniel's trembling palm. I've already moved my things, I said. The furniture Thomas and I bought stays. The memories stay. But the deed? I've transferred the property into a protected charitable trust. It will be turned into a refuge for elderly women who don't have the resources to fight back like I do. You and Vanessa have 24 hours to vacate. My team will be there at noon tomorrow to oversee the move. If a single piece of my husband's silver is missing, the police will be waiting at the gate. You can't do this, Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. We have nowhere to go. We're broke. Then I suggest you start a new series, Vanessa. I said, my tone as sharp as a diamond. Perhaps The Caregiver's Fall, or Life After Fraud. I'm sure your remaining followers will find the authenticity refreshing. I turned my back on them. The revolving door was a wheel of light, beckoning me toward the street where a black town car was waiting. The same kind of car that had dropped us off, but this time, I was the one in the driver's seat of my destiny. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cold night air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to shiver. I felt solid. I felt permanent. Mrs. Vance? The driver asked, holding the door open. Yes, I said. Where to? I looked back at the Holbrook Hotel. I saw the chaos through the glass, the security guards rushing toward the ballroom, the socialites scurrying away from the scandal, and my son standing in the center of the lobby, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. I thought about the closed doors I had lived behind. The doors they had used to hide me, to silence me, to diminish me. Those doors were gone now. I had walked through them and set the house on fire behind me. To the airport, I said, settling into the leather seat. I have a flight to Zurich in 3 hours. There's an old friend there who's been waiting 30 years to see me. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the stream of lights. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The silence was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was the silence of a job well done. It was the silence of an auditor who had finally balanced the books. The hook was no longer in them. It was the anchor that held me steady as I sailed away from the wreckage of their greed. I was 65, I was alone, and for the first time in my life, I was completely, terrifyingly free. The flight to Zurich was a 10-hour sanctuary of hum and shadow. While the rest of the first-class cabin slept under silk blankets, I sat upright, the blue light of my tablet reflecting in my tired eyes. I wasn't looking at movies or reading novels. I was watching the digital world burn. Vanessa's fall was more spectacular than I had anticipated. By the time I crossed the Atlantic, the video from the gala had been spliced, memed, and dissected by every major news outlet and social media commentator. The saint of social media was being dismantled by the very algorithm she had worshipped. People were calling it the gala grifter incident. Sponsors had pulled out so fast that her official website now led to a 404 error page. I felt a twinge of something, not joy but a cold, clinical satisfaction. It was the feeling an auditor gets when the final tally matches the suspected fraud. When the wheels touched down in Switzerland, the air was crisp, tasting of snow and expensive silence. I was met at the gate by a driver holding a sign that simply read Vance. He didn't try to take my small carry-on. He sensed, perhaps from the way I held myself, that I was a woman who preferred to carry her own weight. The car wound through the clean, sharp streets of Zurich, eventually pulling up to a discreet, limestone building overlooking the Limmat River. This was the private banking district, a place where secrets were kept in vaults deeper than the river itself. I was led to a private office on the top floor. The walls were lined with leather-bound ledgers, and the windows offered a panoramic view of the Alps. Sitting behind a desk of dark oak was Mark, my husband Thomas's oldest friend, and the man who had helped build the Holbrook Empire from the shadows. He looked older, his hair a shock of white, but his eyes were still as sharp as a falcon's. "Eleanor," he said, rising to greet me. He didn't offer a hug. He offered a firm, respectful handshake. "You look different." "I've shed some unnecessary layers, Mark," I replied, taking the seat opposite him. He leaned back, tapping a pen against a thick file on his desk. I saw the news. The gala. The projection. It was bold. Thomas would have laughed until he cried. He always said your brain was a lethal weapon hidden behind a soft smile. "Thomas isn't here to protect the legacy," I said, my voice hardening. Daniel was going to sell the Holbrook shares to a private equity firm. He was going to gut the company to pay for his own failures. I couldn't let that happen. Mark sighed, a heavy sound. He is his father's son in looks, but he has none of Thomas's grit. And that girl he married. She's a symptom of a modern sickness, Eleanor. They thought you were a relic. They forgot that relics are made of stone. He slid the file across the desk. "Everything is ready. Since you signed the power of attorney they gave you, using the duress code, it triggered the dead man's switch Thomas and I installed in the trust 10 years ago. Because the signature was flagged as coerced, the entire Vance estate didn't go to Daniel. It reverted to a secondary dormant entity." I opened the file. There it was. The Phoenix Holding Group. "You are now the sole controlling interest of the Holbrook Grand Hotel Group, Eleanor," Mark said quietly. "Daniel and Vanessa have been legally stripped of their executive board seats. As of 9 o'clock this morning, they are technically trespassers in their own offices." "And the embezzlement?" I asked. "The evidence you gathered is irrefutable. The authorities in the States are waiting for your signal." If you move forward, Daniel will likely face 5 to 10 years. Federal charges. I looked out the window at the mountains. The silence in the room was absolute. This was the moment of the true closed door. I could lock my son away, or I could leave the door ajar. I don't want him in prison, Mark, I said finally. Not because I forgive him, I don't. But because prison would give him a reason to blame the world for his life. I want him to live with the consequences of his own choices. Let the civil suits proceed. Let the creditors take what's left of his startup. Let him find out what it's like to start from zero with a ruined reputation. That is a far heavier sentence. Mark nodded, scribbling a note. And Vanessa? Vanessa is already in a prison of her own making, I said. She lives for the eyes of others. Now that those eyes see her with contempt, she is starving. Leave her to her silence. I stood up, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. For 40 years, I had been the wife, then the mother, then the grandmother. I had been the bookkeeper, the cook, the quiet observer. I had spent my life making sure the men in my life looked successful. What will you do now, Eleanor? Mark asked. You have enough wealth to buy a small country. You could retire to a villa in Italy. I thought about the house back home. The house that was now a shelter for women. I thought about the thousands of women like me. Women whose labor and intelligence had been harvested by their families until they were discarded like husks. I'm not retiring, Mark, I said, a small, sharp smile playing on my lips. I'm going to run the Hallbrook. Not as a ghost, and not from behind a closed door. I'm going to show them exactly what happens when the wrong person is finally removed from the helm. As I walked out of the office, I felt the itch of the old, stained cardigan in my memory. I pictured it lying on the floor of the gala stage, a discarded skin. The elevator took me down to the lobby. As I stepped out into the Zurich sun, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Daniel. *, Mom, please. We have nowhere to go. Vanessa is packing her bags. She's leaving me. Please answer. *. I looked at the message for a long beat. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, the old Eleanor, the one who would have sacrificed her own peace to fix his mess, trembled. Then, I did something I had never done in my life. I blocked his number. I tucked the phone away and walked toward the river. The water was fast and cold, moving toward a future I hadn't yet audited, but one I was finally ready to lead. The door hadn't just closed. I had walked through it, and I had taken the hinges with me. As I reached the bridge, a young woman stopped me, clutching a camera. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, looking at my tailored suit and the way I carried myself. "You look incredibly powerful. Can I take your picture for my street-style blog?" I looked at her, then at the camera. I didn't slouch. I didn't look confused. "Only," I said, "if you promise to capture the eyes of a woman who just took her life back." The return to New York was not a homecoming, it was a hostile takeover. I arrived at the Hallbrook Grand Hotel not through the service entrance I had been shuffled through weeks ago, but through the main revolving doors, flanked by a legal team that moved like a silent infantry. The lobby was a cavern of gold leaf and hushed conversations, but the moment I stepped onto the polished marble, the atmosphere shifted. The staff, usually trained to be invisible, froze. They recognized the face from the viral videos, but they didn't recognize the woman. The frail Eleanor was gone, replaced by a silver-haired titan in a charcoal suit that cost more than Vanessa's entire winter wardrobe. "Mrs. Vance," the concierge stammered, bowing slightly. We weren't expecting you." "That is the problem with this hotel, Marcus," I said, not slowing my pace toward the executive elevators. "Too much expecting, not enough observing. Is the board in the conference room?" "Yes, ma'am. They're in an emergency session regarding the current PR crisis." "Good," I replied, the doors sliding shut. "I love an audience." The 30th floor smelled of expensive cigars and panic. As the elevator opened, I could hear the muffled roar of voices from the boardroom. I didn't knock. I signaled for my lead attorney to open the doors, and I walked into the center of the storm. There were 12 men and women around the long mahogany table. At the far end sat Daniel. He looked like a ghost of himself, his tie loosened, his eyes rimmed with red. He was mid-sentence, pleading with the chairman. If we just release a statement saying it was a family dispute, we can stabilize the stock. He stopped when he saw me. The room went silent, the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. Mother, Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't look at him. I walked to the head of the table, where Chairman Holloway sat. Holloway was a man who had built his career on the backs of others. A man who had laughed with my husband Thomas while secretly plotting to dilute our shares the moment Thomas's heart stopped beating. Eleanor, Holloway said, his voice dripping with forced condescension. This is a private board meeting. You aren't authorized to be here. Daniel, please escort your mother out. Daniel isn't escorting anyone anywhere, Arthur, I said, placing my leather briefcase on the table with a sharp thud. And as for authorization, I believe you'll find my credentials have been updated. My attorney stepped forward, handing a thick stack of documents to each board member. As of 9 a.m. this morning, he announced, the Phoenix Holding Group has exercised its majority buyback option, triggered by the breach of ethics clause in the late Thomas Vance's estate. Mrs. Eleanor Vance is now the chairwoman of the board with a 51% controlling interest. The sound of rustling paper was the only noise in the room. Holloway's face turned a violent shade of purple. Daniel looked like he was about to be sick. You can't, Daniel stammered. I'm the CEO. I have a contract. I finally looked at my son. I saw the weakness I had spent years trying to compensate for. You were the CEO, Daniel. But you violated the most basic tenet of the Vance legacy. You didn't just fail the company. You betrayed the one person who kept the books balanced when you were too busy playing visionary. I turned to the rest of the board. The wrong people are no longer running this company. As my first act as chairwoman, I am dismissing Daniel Vance effective immediately. No severance. No stock options. We will be conducting a full forensic audit into the embezzlement of the legacy trust, and the findings will determine if we pursue criminal charges. Mom, you wouldn't, Daniel gasped, standing up so quickly his chair toppled over. I have nowhere to go. Vanessa, she's already cleared out the apartment. She's gone, Mom. She took the car, the jewelry, everything that wasn't bolted down. She said I was toxic for her brand. She was always a quick learner, Daniel, I said coldly. She saw you were no longer an asset, so she liquidated you. It's exactly what you tried to do to me. I sat down in the chairman's seat, the seat that had been empty since the day Thomas died. It felt cold, but it felt right. Arthur, I said to Holloway, who was staring at me in shock. You're retired. I'll expect your resignation on my desk by noon. The rest of you stay seated. We have a lot of work to do to clean up the mess my son and his saintly wife left behind. The meeting lasted 6 hours. By the time I walked out, the board was terrified. The PR team was drafting a total transparency statement, and the Vance name was being salvaged from the wreckage. I walked toward the elevators, but stopped when I saw a figure sitting on a plush bench in the hallway. It was Daniel. He was slumped over, his head in his hands. He looked utterly, devastatingly alone. I don't even have a place to sleep tonight, he said to the floor as I approached. The bank froze the joint accounts. Vanessa changed the locks on her studio. I stood over him. The old Eleanor wanted to reach out, to tell him there was a guest room at the house, to tell him I would fix it. But I remembered the kitchen. I remembered the stained cardigan. I remembered the look in his eyes when he thought I didn't know what I was signing. There is a small apartment near the docks, I said. It belongs to the company. It's one room, no view. It's where your father started when he was 21. I've authorized you to stay there for 30 days. He looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. And then, I said, leaning down so he could see the absolute lack of pity in my gaze. You do what I did. You find a way to survive without destroying the people who love you. If you can do that, maybe in 5 years, we can have a conversation. But for now, Daniel, the door is closed. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back when the elevator dived toward the lobby. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk, a crowd of reporters was waiting. The news of the grandmother takeover had already leaked. Microphones were shoved into my face, and cameras flashed like lightning. Mrs. Vance, is it true you fired your own son? What's your message to the shareholders? Eleanor, look this way. I stopped at the edge of the red carpet. I looked into the nearest lens, the same kind of lens Vanessa had used to mock me. "My message is simple," I said, my voice carrying over the din of the city. "The audit is over. The books are balanced. And from now on, the only person telling the story of Eleanor Vance is Eleanor Vance." As my car pulled away, I checked my private email. There was a single message from a blocked sender. No text, just an image attached. It was a photo of Vanessa, standing outside a cheap motel, her designer bags piled on the gravel, her face stripped of filters and glamour. She looked ordinary. She looked small. I deleted the email without a second thought. I had a hotel to run. The house was quiet, but it was no longer the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of a sanctuary. I sat by the fireplace in the same armchair where, only weeks ago, Vanessa had draped that hideous pilled blanket over me for her caregiver chronicles. The blanket was gone, burned in the backyard incinerator along with the stained cardigan, and the pale foundation that had made me look like a ghost. On the mantelpiece, the photograph of Thomas seemed to catch the light of the dying embers. I looked at his familiar smile, and felt a profound sense of closure. The audit was complete. Not just the financial audit of the Hallbrook Grand Hotel, but the audit of my own heart. I had spent 40 years believing that my value was a derivative of the people I served. I had played the quiet bookkeeper to his visionary, the supportive mother to Daniel's ambition, and the invisible grandmother to a family that had eventually tried to trade me for a viral hashtag. Now I was simply Eleanor. A soft chime came from the foyer. I didn't jump. I knew who it was. I stood up, my movements fluid and free of the feigned stiffness I had used as camouflage. I opened the front door to find Sarah, a woman in her late 50s I had met through a legal aid clinic. Behind her stood two younger women, their faces etched with the kind of wary exhaustion I knew all too well. They carried their lives in plastic bins and tattered duffel bags. "Welcome," I said, stepping aside and gesturing to the warm, amber light of the hallway. "This is a safe house now. My home is your home." As Sarah led them toward the guest wing, rooms that had once sat empty and pristine, waiting for a son who only visited when he needed a loan, I felt the house breathe again. It was being repurposed, much like I was. It was no longer a monument to a dead marriage or a hollow legacy. It was a living, breathing machine for survival. I retreated to Thomas's old study. It was now my office. The mahogany desk was covered in architectural blueprints for the new Hallbrook community centers, and quarterly reports that showed a staggering recovery in the hotel's reputation. People didn't just want luxury anymore. They wanted the Eleanor standard. A brand built on the radical idea of transparency and the fierce protection of the vulnerable. I sat down and opened my laptop. My inbox was a battlefield of unread messages. There were desperate pleas from Daniel, sent from his one-room apartment by the docks. He had written a 10-page apology, a sprawling, messy document that blamed his burnout, Vanessa's manipulation, and the pressure of the legacy. He asked for a second chance, not as a CEO, but as a son. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. Forgiveness is a luxury for those who have changed. Daniel hadn't changed. He was simply suffering the consequences of being caught. He didn't miss me. He missed the safety net I provided. I wasn't being cruel. I was being an auditor. The debt of his betrayal was too high, and he was currently insolvent. Perhaps in a decade, he would find the capital to settle his moral accounts. Until then, the door remained locked. Then there was the news about Vanessa. Oh, where are they now? Tabloid piece had surfaced. She was living in a small town in the Midwest, working at a local diner. Someone had snapped a grainy photo of her wiping down a counter. She wasn't wearing silk or Chanel. She was wearing a polyester uniform and a name tag that read Van. The article mentioned she had tried to start a new redemption journey vlog, but it had been flagged and removed for violating harassment policies. She was a woman who lived for the lens, now trapped in a world where no one was looking. I felt a brief flicker of pity, then it vanished. I had spent enough of my life feeling things for people who felt nothing for me. I turned my attention to a new folder on my desktop, the Willows investigation. Using the resources of the Phoenix Holding Group, I had begun a quiet, systematic acquisition of the memory care facility, where Daniel and Vanessa had planned to dump me. I hadn't bought it to shut it down. I had bought it to gut the management. The fraudulent doctors, the predatory billing cycles, the saintly caregivers who were nothing more than wardens. They were all being audited. One by one. I was opening the closed doors of an industry that preyed on the silence of the elderly. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark in Zurich. Asterisk, the merger is finalized. The Hallbrook is officially untouchable. What's next, chairwoman? Asterisk. I looked out the window at the New York skyline. The lights of the city were a map of 1,000 stories, 1,000 closed doors. I thought about the thousands of women my age who were currently sitting in kitchens just like mine, feeling themselves being erased by the people they loved. I began to type a reply. Asterisk, next we find the others. We build a network. If the world thinks we are invisible, we will use that invisibility to move the foundations of the earth. Asterisk. I hit send and closed the laptop. The click of the screen was final. I walked back to the living room and sat by the fire. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a door to open. I wasn't waiting for a husband to come home, a son to call, or a daughter-in-law to approve of me. I picked up the crossword puzzle from the side table. 14 across. Asterisk, a 7-letter word for free from the control of others. Asterisk. I didn't even hesitate. I wrote it in pen, my handwriting steady and bold. Liberty. The closed door was no longer a symbol of my isolation. It was a symbol of my ownership. I was 65, the books were balanced, and for the first time in my life, I was the only person with the key to my own soul. As the clock struck midnight, the fire crackled, casting a long, strong shadow against the wall. The shadow of a woman who had been pushed into the dark, only to find that she was the one holding the match. The story was over. But the legacy was just beginning.